Good evening. Okay, good to see everybody. Wait a couple more minutes here. Hope everybody's doing okay, not getting wet. Oh, what is it? Okay, let's try this way. Okay. All right. Well, tonight we'll talk about Passover,
Oh, yeah. Yep.
everybody's favorite holiday. Or it's actually the most observed, well, maybe Hanukkah or something. Well, I don't even think Hanukkah is, I mean, Hanukkah people know about, but I think Passover is probably the most observed Jewish holiday in terms of families getting together and having some version of the Seder meal. What did I just do with what I'm working on tonight? Okay, here we go.
I'm going to be eating my dinner, so I'm going to shut down my video.
Good for you. All right. All right, here we go. Okay. But I hope everybody's doing okay. And are getting ready for spring. Starting to warm up. A lot of rain today. April showers bring May flowers. So hope that works. We've got we a couple of years ago we got rid of part of our lawn, part in our front of our house, and we put in a native plant meadow. So we're looking forward to that coming up, all these native flowers and stuff like that. And we don't have to mow that section. So looking forward to the rain helping that out. Okay, good. Paul, glad you're doing well. We are doing good. We are actually tomorrow. I start a week-long vacation, so looking forward to that. We'll be in Chicago for most of it, and one of the things we'll be doing is referring to our discussion tonight, Passover shopping. We'll be going to in Chicago. There's at least one completely kosher grocery store, which is great. And this grocery store happens to be owned by the Jewish guy who, well, I don't know if he is Sephardi, which are Jews from mostly North African countries, or if he just caters to a larger Sephardi community. But it's a really nice grocery store and a lot of different types of food, kosher foods. And then there's a Jewel Osco in Chicago, which about half, well, not half, about a third of the store is fully kosher. So during this time of year, it's easy to go to the kosher these places and just shop for Passover. Oh gosh, I didn't talk about that in my thing. Wait a minute, I gotta add this in here so I don't forget to talk about it. Let's see, what did I put in here? Eat matzah. Oh yeah, let's do that in here. Okay. So we'll be spending time going to probably going to both of the places. It is a opportunity for kosher food producers to price gouge their community, which is really a lovely thing for them to do. But the prices of these things go up ridiculously of everything. But it's 1 week a year, so that's what you always hear. Well, it's only 1 week a year. Well, you can't complain too much. Well, okay. But it is, and we'll talk about some of the food restrictions in a moment. Okay. Oh, all right. It's past 7:30. All right. Oh, good to see Paige and Andrea. Good to have you with us. Terrific. Okay, so let me pull up the screen here. Um, okay, and I do apologize. I usually try to make the, no, wait a minute, that wasn't what I want. I want that. Okay, you should be able to see the PowerPoint. A little pressed today, so I did not do my usual attempt to be as attractive as possible with the PowerPoint. I so I apologize. It's a little dry here, but it'll be good enough for me to remember what I want to talk about. Wait, what? Now, how do I do this again? I want to. No, oh, you have to. Why? It makes it so hard. Okay, slideshow. No, that wasn't what I wanted. Presenter view. Play from start. How about that? Let's do that. And all I need to do is find my notes. Okay. All right, no, wait, but I don't want that here. I want that here. Okay. I think we're ready. All right. So first I want to start with, okay, so the name of the holiday in Hebrew of Passover is Pesach. Interesting enough, the words mean the same thing. It's called Passover, of course, because the angel of death at the end, the last plague that allows the Israelites to leave, is the angel of death passes over their houses because they put the blood of this lamb sacrifice on their doorposts. And Pesach means the exact same thing, to jump over. Okay. Now, each. Wait, no. Okay, one of these days I'm going to. Oh, here we go. There, I see the little button. Okay, got it. Here we go. Each of the festivals, there's three biblical festivals that we celebrate. It's in the Torah: Passover, Shavuot, and Sukkot. Well, Pesach, I should have put Pesach as the Hebrew name. Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. Pesach is in the spring, but it's the first holiday of the festival season in the spring, and each of these holidays has a historical and agricultural reference. We all know the historical reference to Pesach. It's the Exodus story. For Shavuot, you can see the picture in the middle there. It's supposed to be representing the Ten Commandments being given at that time on Mount Sinai. That's the revelation of God on Mount Sinai. So that's the historical reference for Shavuot. Sukkot is a little tougher because there isn't one event that Sukkot is connected to historically, but it's the idea that they were traveling through the desert during the 40 years of wandering, and they would live in these Sukkot, these booths, during this period of time. And also they each have an agricultural element. Passover is the barley harvest, and that we'll mention that in a moment at the end, how that's related. Passover is the barley harvest. Shavuot is the next harvest. It's wheat harvest. And then finally, Sukkot is the end of season harvest. That's when you bring in all the food. That's why, if those of you who were with us at the beginning, remember we talked about Sukkot, and Sukkot is known as Hechag, the holiday, capital T, capital H, because that's when your stores are full. But each of these holidays, these are each festival holidays. Passover and Sukkot are both 7-day festivals. We'll get to it in a moment. That in the diaspora, it's an 8-day festival for each. The diaspora being outside the land of Israel. Shavuot is a 1-day holiday, which is connected to Passover because it's exactly 50 days after Passover. And again, in the diaspora outside of Israel, it's a 2-day holiday. We'll talk about that in a moment too, why it's an extra day. So you have these dual connections for the holiday. Now, the historical reference for Pesach is what we call the Jewish master story. This is the big story. This is the key story from which so many other elements of Judaism draw from, and it's so significant in so many areas of Jewish life. We mention it repeatedly every day in the when we say the Shema, and when we looked at the prayer service, the liturgy of the of well, Jewish liturgy for prayer. One of the things we do every day is we recite the Shema. Shema is that line that says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord God, the Lord is one." But the Shema in the prayer service is actually three paragraphs, two from Deuteronomy and one from the book of Numbers. And in the third paragraph of the book of not in the from the book of the third paragraph, the one that comes from the book of Numbers, it mentions that I'm the Lord your God who took you out of the land of Egypt. And so we recite that every day, twice a day, we recite that phrase. We remind ourselves that our relationship to God begins with God taking us out of Egypt. It's also in many of our holiday our special prayers on the holiday. On Friday night, and any holiday night actually, when we say the Kiddush, when we sanctify the holiday, we sanctify the Shabbat through the recitation of this prayer over a cup of wine. Once again, we mention the Sabbath. We mention the experience of the Exodus from Egypt. And many, many times in the Torah, let alone the rest of the Bible, God reminds the people, I'm the God who took you out of Egypt. It's often used as a reference to remind us why we should be kind to those who are strangers, why we should be kind to those who are persecuted and oppressed, because we were once, we know that story. Uh, um, we were enslaved, we were persecuted, and so therefore the response is not to be that way, is to not become like our oppressors, which, of course, without going too much into detail with the current situation in Israel, is, always an issue, is that, and that's the pushback. When Israel or the government of Israel acts in a way either out of protection, of its borders, or whether out of mean-spiritedness, there's always this pushback that, wait a minute, we're not supposed to be like those who treated us when we were minorities. So, but that's a factor, and this story. But the point is that when the government of Israel or groups within the state of Israel or Jewish people in general treat other people badly, people who are in their power, people who are in the power of the Jewish people for whatever, either in the state of Israel, they're minorities that live in the state, or the Palestinians who live in around the state, or just people that a Jewish person has power over. I mean, the pushback, don't treat people that, the way we were treated, comes from this story, because we know the pain of being persecuted. So this story is the one that gives us the courage to stand up and say, we shouldn't be that way. We shouldn't act in this persecutorial way. Okay, so that's one element of the master story. Also, it's the master story because it created the Jewish people. In the book of Genesis, which is also, of course, part of our story, but there, it's the story of a family legacy, right? Well, the first part isn't even about Jews. It's about Adam and Eve and the creation of the world and how the world develops. But eventually we get to Abraham and Abraham's family and the descendants that come from Abraham. But by the end of Genesis, they're still a family clan. When they enter into Egypt, the beginning of the book of Exodus, of course, is that this family, Jacob's family, 70 people, went down to Egypt. and that begins the story. So from 70, we become a much larger clan. The numbers are of course, exorbitant in and exaggerated in Exodus. They have to be that 600,000 men left. The Israelites, there were 600,000 men who left, let alone how many more children and women. Must have been million and several million people. But the so those numbers are inflated, but there's no reality to those numbers. There can't be. But the idea that in that period of time, those hundreds of years of enslavement, this family became a larger, more complex people is correct. And that's the first time that Israel is referred to as a people. Um, okay, I also want to say the month of Passover is important. We are not yet, next week, we will be in the month of Nisan. Nisan is the month of Pesach and and in the Torah, this we are told this is the beginning of months. Now sometimes it gets a little confusing because wait a minute, I thought Rosh Hashanah in the fall, which is in the month of Tishrei. Wait, that's the beginning of the year. We call it the holiday Rosh Hashanah, New Year. But first of all, again, going back to those early lessons, there are several times during the year, according to the rabbis, that it's a new year. Um, Not so different from what we have in America, right? I mean, hey, baseball just started. That's the new year for, well, if you're not a White Sox fan, maybe this is the beginning of the new year. But no, if you're a White Sox fan, it's like, when is this nightmare over? But anyway, but we have lots of, the fiscal new year, and we have the January 1st new year. So we also have a lot of new years. And the rabbis say, well, we do too, but the one that we refer to usually as the new year, then we call that holiday Rosh Hashanah, is in the fall. But there's a debate in the early sources as to when the world really began. Did it begin in Tishrei, the month of this holiday we call Rosh Hashanah, or did it actually begin in Nisan? Because Nisan is the month of Pesach, and Nisan is when the Jewish people started. And the Torah itself in Exodus, in fact, this week's Torah portion, if you're in the synagogue, you'll hear that we read this section, which is from Exodus 12, chapter 12, saying this is going to be the beginning of your year. This is the first month of the year. Nisan is also significant because we're also reading about this in the Torah portion itself, the weekly Torah portion. Nisan was the month when the tabernacle was erected. So it was a beginning in that way too. It was a start of something, this new order. Let me just make sure I got all okay. All right. Thank you, Brittany, for your confidence. All right. Let's go to, okay. So the message of Pesach. Rabbi Yitz Greenberg, who I'm pretty sure, one of the books on the bibliography, I think I only have one book on the bibliography now for the holidays. It's from Yitz Greenberg, and it's a wonderful book explaining the kind of the essential meaning of the holidays. And Rabbi Greenberg writes that there's several messages that come out of Pesach. And the first is that the world can be perfected. Tikkun, I'm sure you've all heard the phrase, it's very common today, tikkun olam, which is used as a Hebrew version of social justice. It means a lot of different things. And originally it was a Kabbalistic notion, but the idea of tikkun is common in Jewish sources about this idea of repair, and so this idea of tikkun, that things can be fixed, people can be fixed, our bad behaviors can be fixed, as well as the world can be fixed and perfected. That comes out of the story of Pesach, that because number 3 there, what appears to be normative power structures doesn't have to be. right? If we look at the world, if we didn't look at the world from a religious perspective, we you would be hard pressed not to accept the idea that the world works on a system where a dog eat dog world, and the big fish eat the little fish, because that's the way it seems in the world. That the more powerful people are, the more money, the more whatever, the more prestige, those are the people who rule. And those are the people who are always on top. But Pesach says that doesn't have to be. That oppression and exploitation of human beings is wrong, right? Enslavement, it's just not right. We're all basically servants of the divine, and being a slave to another human being or a servant to another human being is is not the appropriate uh, relationship that humans should have with each other. The only people that we ultimately serve, or serve, I would say, permanently, is God. And so exploitation's wrong, oppression's wrong, things can be, and what looks like normative is not. Um, and finally, and this is throughout the story of the Exodus, God is constantly pushing the message to Pharaoh and the Egyptians that God's the God of the entire world. That again, even though God might be saving Israel, liberating Israel, it's because God is the God of the entire world and controls the world, and therefore God determines what's right and what's wrong. Um, so these are some of the core messages that we find in Pesach from the Pesach story. Calendar impact. um, Let me just where's my notes here? Um, okay, so first of all, I think we've mentioned this before, but if we haven't, it's important to note the Jewish calendar is not a lunar calendar; it's a lunar and solar calendar. And the Muslim community, which does have a lunar calendar exclusively, you notice they just celebrated Ramadan. I think it was just over, and um, and Ramadan was in the spring this year, but sometimes it's in the winter, sometimes it's in the summer, because a purely lunar calendar is a little bit short of a solar calendar. A lunar year of 12 months is 11 days short of a 365-day solar cycle. So what happens is, of course, if you're celebrating a holiday in a particular lunar month, it's going to, over 4, 5, 6 years, it's going to end up in a very different place. Our calendar is both lunar and solar. And the reason is that Passover has to fall in the spring. So it's a 19-year cycle, and 7 times within that cycle, so every 2 to 3 years, an extra month is added to the calendar. We talked about this, I think, when we were talking about Purim, that this year Purim fell in the month of Adar Sheni, or Adar number 2, second month of Adar. Um, Very uncreative. The extra month is called, well, it's also weird because the extra month is called Adar number 1. And Adar number 2 is the normal month of Adar. So some years you just have Adar, and some years you have Adar 1 and Adar 2. This year, when we had Adar number 1 thrown in, it pushed Passover back for a month, or it pushed the whole calendar back a month, which is why Passover is so much later. Usually Passover is a lot closer to Easter, but this year, and I forget the exact how they determine when Easter falls, but this year Passover is almost a month after Easter. But next year it'll be closer. Um, and again, I don't, the mathematics there are unbelievable, because this 19-year cycle was determined in the 4th century, and they had the math that you can develop, and I have in my in my phone, I have a Hebrew calendar where I can tell you what day Passover will fall in 50 years. But they knew that math 2,000 years ago, or well, 1,500 years ago. So it's pretty remarkable. Whatever, anything with math is remarkable to me. Um, okay, and we'll get back to the calendar in a moment. I think there's something else I wanted to say about the calendar. Okay, anyway, so that's the calendar. That's why Passover is falling in the spring. It always has to fall in the spring. Now, there's two core elements to the Passover, and they relate to the Passover story itself. First one is the Passover offering, which was brought in temple times. All of Israel, how they did it in one afternoon, I don't know. But all of Israel would bring their paschal offering, which was a lamb, to the temple and offer up the lamb would be offered up, and the family would take and eat of the meat of that sacrifice. And that paschal offering came from the story in which, we mentioned a moment ago, at the 10th plague, when the angel of death comes and destroys the firstborn of the Egyptian children, the firstborn Egyptians, not only children, firstborn. The Jews use the blood of that specific animal, that lamb offering. They put it on the doorposts of their house, and the angel of death knows to pass their house. As one of the midrashim tell us, the reason why they had to do it is because once that angel of death, once that demonic, once the destroying angel is released, there's no way to protect. I mean, it's so chaos. I guess what I'm trying to say, it's complete chaos. And so this blood in the story was like a protective device that kept that chaos from entering. So now we don't have a temple, so we don't offer up this sacrifice, of course, but it's an element in the story, and it's an element we'll talk about next week when we talk about the Seder. It's an element in the Seder experience, even though we don't have the offering itself. In fact, the Ashkenazic Eastern European Jewish custom is not to eat lamb at all on that for a dinner option on Passover, because we want to say it's a little too close. We don't do it anymore. We don't have this sacrifice. And I guess for traditional Jews who look forward to the return of the temple, then they would be saying, we're not going to eat it until the day comes when we can actually eat the real sacrifice. However, the Sephardi custom, the Jews originally from Spain, but many of them are in North Africa and Arab countries, originally came from Arab or North African countries. It was their custom. It is some of the communities custom to davka, to specifically eat lamb, because they want that closer connection with the experience of our ancestors. Also, the other element around Passover is the removal of chametz, and that's also part of the story. The Pharaoh keeps promising you can leave, and he never commits to it. He always stops them. Well, on this 10th plague, finally he says, get out of here. However, not trusting that the Pharaoh is going to actually let them leave, they quickly got ready to go, and they they don't allow their bread to rise the way bread is traditionally made, not the way we do it today with yeast or artificial yeast to make it rise. Is that they would, it's a starter dough. It's like what do they call it? sourdough bread. Sourdough bread has you take some of your starter dough and you put that with the rest of the dough, and that then causes the bread to leaven through the yeast that's already in that starter. Oh yeah, Michael?
Can you hear me? One question I've had about this is actually a year ago, I had the privilege of spending an entire week in Luxor, Egypt,
Mm,
because of friends of ours who are Egyptologists. They work there. So we had a chance to visit all of these tombs of
yeah,
Tutankhamun, and it was fantastic. And I was impressed by all of the what do you call it, the paintings, hieroglyphs on the
yeah.
walls and stuff. So my question is, to cut to the chase, is there a record in Egyptian stuff, ancient writings or in the hieroglyphs on the walls of these tombs of these events, or is it only in the Bible?
Right. Oh, that's a great question. So we have no outside, as far as I know, there's no outside evidence of the way that this story is told. There is though what is there is a what I call it, not a well, it's a tablet. It's the what's the word I'm looking for, but there is a tablet, an edifice that refers to one of the Egyptian pharaohs and their conquests. And they refer what's so interesting is they there's a suffix in the hieroglyphs that refer to a nation, and um, in this stone that on it is inscribed the story of this pharaoh's conquests. It has all of these nation states that he conquers, and then it's got the word, and I forget the exact language, but it's well understood that it's referring to like what the Jews were called, like either the Yehudim or something like that. But it doesn't have that nation suffix,
Hmm.
which of course would make sense if following the story of the book of Exodus, they don't enter Egypt as a nation. They leave as a nation, but as they enter, they're just a clan. So that's all that I know of that has evidence, of actual historical evidence. There is I gave a sermon on this. I think it was Ben Summer wrote this, but a sermon that there is historical evidence of an Egyptian pharaoh who fights certain battles, um, and the it's not about fighting. It's not about with Israel, but the the story that's being told is similar to what we were reading in the Exodus. The terms of the way the battle is formed at the Sea of Reeds, and I think it's a story of his loss in battle. Anyway, it's very some of the storytelling is very similar to what we have in the book of Exodus. Um, but it's not a story about the Jewish people or Israel or anything. It's some other battle that he's doing. So it's very possible that um, the narrative that we have is based on something that actually happened, or some kind of a story that happened, but it's told, but it's not exactly, and it's not our story necessarily. It became, it was retold by later generations. So but so there's no historical, as far as I know, there's no historical evidence that the story of the Exodus is accurate. There's
Okay.
and there's always an attempt. There's always an attempt. People, scientists, and scholars have tried to line up the 10 tribes the 10 tribes, the 10 plagues with things that actually happened in nature and how they would go from, and then how the order of the plagues makes sense. So, like for example, the first plague is blood, and that's somehow connected to like an algae bloom, which is red, and then that kills the frogs, so they're jumping out of the water, and then the frogs,
Right.
they die on land, and that leads to what's the next one is it's not cattle disease. It's it's fly. Is it flies? Anyway, so they try to make sense of the chronology, but again, I don't think that's the point of the Passover story. I don't think we're intended to read it as a historical narrative. Rather, it is, as we just saw, the the meaning of the story, as Yitz Greenberg points out, is that the way the world we look at with the natural order of the world is not the way it's supposed to be. People shouldn't be exploited. That God is the God of the entire world. That the world can be perfected, it can be fixed, and I think that's the message, as not so much the actual that it's telling us a historical um, um, chronological history, the way we understand history, which is actual facts and evidence. Um,
Let me ask you two more things,
yeah.
real quick. You don't have to answer these right away.
Okay.
What was the reaction, let's say, of the Jewish community as a whole to Cecil B. DeMille's epic Ten Commandments movie?
Uh,
And also Freud's book, Moses and Monotheism. I really don't know what the reaction was, but you don't have to answer that now. Keep
okay.
it in mind.
All right. Very good. Anyway, so I want to get back. So the first is we talked about we talked about the Passover offering, and we talked about the removal of chametz. So in the story, they got to leave so quickly they can't let the bread rise, um, and they have to exit without leavened grain, which is of course the origin of matzah. Um, And it's also very, speaking of Egypt, it's very interesting. I've read articles that talk about how actually bread was developed in Egypt. So the notion of not eating bread during this holiday is also a pushback against Egyptian culture. Um, okay, so so those are the two elements that are essential in the story. Um, and they lead to certain practices. Okay, so key Passover mitzvot. Removal of chametz. Now this is a big one because, and I didn't have time to write all this stuff down, but I'll tell you. This is the big preparation for the holiday. You want to remove all of your leavened grained products. Now there's 5 grains that make up this that are the grains that we're not allowed to have in the house. Wheat, oats, spelt, rye, and I know I was going to forget the 5th one. Wheat, oat, barley. Barley. Those 5, anything that, even the dry grain, even the dry flour you wouldn't want in the house because once water or any kind of liquid falls on a grain, it begins the process of leavening. Certainly, so that means bread, cookies, cakes, noodles. But there's so many other foods that have chametz as part of it. Wait, did I do? Wait, I said, oh, wait. I said oats, right? Um, Oats are another one. So you can't have, oat milk, there's just so many things. Whiskey. This becomes a little tricky for the holiday because some people, you can throw out a cup of of flour, right? I baked. We had flour in the house. I just finished baking um, uh, 2 loaves of bread because well we'll eat over the next couple of weeks. So I want to get rid of the flour, so we don't have any flour left. There's about a cup of flour left. Okay, it's no big deal. You throw the flour out, or better yet, if you have, I also have boxes of noodles. Well, I'll give them away. It's really a great time to give away food to food pantries. But what do you do with whiskey? Um, you've got, maybe you have good whiskey in the house or something, or you're not going to drink it all. You shouldn't, definitely not it's healthy to drink it all before the holiday. It's not really something you want to give to a food pantry. So we'll get to that in a moment. What do you do with cases like that? But the idea is, so there's so many things that have leaven grain in it. We want to get rid of all this stuff. So the process of removing it starts well before the holiday. As I said, we're doing it right now. We're trying to eat up all of our chametz, and then the couple days before Passover, whatever packaged goods I have that I can get rid of, or if we have, um, I make my own oat milk, and why? I do this every year. I did it once with noodles were on pasta was on sale. And in this case, I was at the Costco and I make my own oat milk. So it was fantastic. It was $8 for like 10 pounds of oats. I was like, oh, great, I'll have this. Well, great. I mean, I've used like 1 pound of it and now I'm never going to finish it up. So hopefully, food pantry will benefit from my, attempt to save money. Um, the but these are all the things that we're getting rid of now. And the reason why it's so important is when we had our talk on kashrut, one of the rules I mentioned was that if you have something we're not allowed to eat, like let's say you've got a piece of you've got why you would have a piece of ham, but let's say there was a piece of ham fell into your um, humongous pot of stew that you were making. Oh my God, you have to throw out, 10 pounds of stew because one little piece, or let's see, more reasonable. We're not allowed to eat milk and meat together. A little piece of cheese fell into your meat stew. Oh my God, I have to throw out the whole stew? No. If it was 60 times more of the stew than of the cheese, it's considered as nothing. It's nullified. On Passover, there is no nullification. 1 crumb of chametz, 1 crumb of wheat, of bread, falls into your pot that you're cooking for Passover, the whole thing's got to go. So we're really careful to remove all of the chametz. That's just one of the rules of Passover. You want to remove all the chametz. So there's different ways of doing it. Let me go through. And there's also something known as ta'arovet chametz, which is a food mixture that has chametz in it. So you might have made I don't know, some kind of a food that has a roux. The roux is that sauce that you put wheat in to to thicken the sauce. Well, that's like tarovet chametz. It's obviously not a piece of bread, but it's got wheat in there. So the so a chametz on Pesach is any amount, even infinitesimal, makes it inedible and is a transgression. And we'll get to this. We'll finish by talking about the spiritual meaning of that. So the first stage of removing chametz is cleaning, and you clean everything. You clean the car. I don't know. Maybe some people don't eat in their car, but I do. So you clean your car. You clean rooms beyond the kitchen. What if because maybe you ate in one of the rooms of your house and you didn't remember? So we clean the rooms. We clean behind stoves and cabinets. So we go pretty extreme on cleaning to make sure, especially in the kitchen, to make sure, or anywhere that you might bring food, to make sure it's clean. So then, so that's part one, and that can go on right now. Jewish people are cleaning their houses already. After Purim, everybody starts cleaning. Um, but some people are a little chill about it, and maybe they do it the week before Passover. Stage two acknowledges that such attempts at cleaning might miss some crumbs or forgotten areas, and that's referred to as nullification. Anything left after cleaning is like dust of the earth to me. That's what you say. It's the night before Passover. So it's the Seder takes place at night. The night before, you go on a final cleaning checkup. And traditionally it's done, but hopefully by that point your house is clean. You're not really looking for stuff. But and some people do it symbolically. The traditional way is to take a candle, because a candle gives off a more intense light. So you take a candle and you take a feather and you go looking for those last crumbs. We used to do it with our kids. It was like a fun thing what we would do the night before the holiday started. And but at that time, once you do that, like, okay, we checked everything, there is this statement that you make that says anything left after this cleaning is like dust of the earth to me. um, well, actually, there's two. I should say that two nullifications. The night before, you say anything I haven't seen is like dust of the earth to me. The reason why you use that formula, anything I haven't seen, is because the next morning you might want to eat your last amount of chametz. You want to finish it up in the morning, and then late morning you say, then you make another nullification statement. Anything I've seen or I haven't seen is like dust of the earth to me. It doesn't belong to me. And this means, so if you find something, so because it could happen, you've cleaned the house, you've done everything you can. Oh, you find out you left I don't know, a piece of cake somewhere you hid it in your drawer. I don't know. You hid it somewhere, a piece of cake, and you find it. Oh, what do you do? Well, obviously you're not allowed to have it. You've nullified it. It doesn't technically. You made the statement saying this piece of cake doesn't belong to me, and then what you would do is you would just take that piece of cake and remove it from the house, or you would cover it up so that it doesn't mess up the rest of your holiday. You're not upset about having that piece of cake in the house because it's supposed to be a chametz free zone. But if you find it, it means you can't use it. And even after the holiday, you don't want to eat it either because you've nullified it. Okay, that's stage two. Stage three is, and this is a very common thing that if you were at services, you heard me mention that if you want to sell your chametz, that I've got forms now that you sell. So, and what we do is, and it really originally started because there were businesses. What if you were a baker? A baker, you can't get rid of all of your chametz. It says your lifeblood, and you can't. If you had to sell it all, well, it would be really rough because everybody knows, or the non-Jews know, oh, Jews can't have chametz during Passover, so I'll, they got to get rid of it. I'll buy it at a cheaper price. So what happened was there was this development of a rule that you could sell your chametz during the time of Passover. And it's a real sale in terms of the language of the document. What I do is I act as the broker for anybody in my congregation, any Jewish person who wants to sell who's selling their chametz, and then I sell it to a non-Jewish person. I sell all of these people's chametz, and the contract works like this. It's like there's an 8-day period where the buyer of the chametz gets to decide whether they want to really buy all the stuff. And because how are you going to assess, 3 bags of, or in my case, when I bought all this pasta on sale, 10 boxes of pasta, 2 bottles of whiskey. Well, it takes time to assess this. So we're given this period of time. The buyer is given this period of time before they take um, possession of the goods. As far as I know, no period in history of the sale has the non-Jew actually gone to the Jew and said, "Okay, yeah, now I'd like to buy your stuff. Let's come up with a price." At the end of 8 days, the non-Jew says, "I don't really want it," and you tear up the agreement. Now, originally, as I said, this was very important because if you were in the business of where you needed chametz, this was really very important. What happens, like so many other rules, is that it now becomes everybody. Everybody, they've got half a loaf of bread, they stick it in their closet, they put it out of the way, and they sell their half loaf of bread. I mean, it's ridiculous. But what I like about the sale is simply the idea of saying, I'm doing everything I can to get rid of this chametz. I've eaten it, I've given it away, I've cleaned it, I've nullified it, and now I'm selling it. And so but in some cases, like if you were a person who had maybe several $100s worth of valuable whiskey in your house, bourbon or scotch or something, yeah, I mean, it's silly to pour it out, to throw it away is not necessary. You can sell that, and then you can use it after the holiday. Now, what's the symbolic meaning of all of this chametz? How do we make sense of it in a spiritual sense? Well, chametz is leavened grain, which is something which is puffed up. It's arrogance. And in many Jewish moral teachers, they use this period of pre-Passover as another period of time, just like at the New Year, just like at Rosh Hashanah, to do what we call a cheshbon hanefesh, what do I want to say, a spiritual accounting, and in which we look within and we want to clean out that moral chametz, and so we're looking to remove the arrogance and the wicked elements of our character. And that's since I really, really hate cleaning, that's what motivates me when I'm cleaning, is that, okay, I'm rubbing this, I'm pulling out my oven and scrubbing down this grotesque gunk because I got to get rid of it, and may this external act, may it encourage me, motivate me to get rid of the gunk in my self. So that's what chametz becomes during Passover. It's a little bit unfair to the chametz because the rest of the year chametz is great, but this period of time, these 8 days, it's very negative. One more thing I want to say about food is, on top of not eating chametz, bread, grain, any of these grain products during Passover, Ashkenazic Jews have a custom, and nobody knows where it developed, but boy, does it make it really hard to enjoy Pesach with your food, that is. There was a custom and again, these are the Eastern European Jews, Sephardic Jews, North African, Turkish, Arab, Jewish communities do not have this custom. But the custom is that not only do we not eat chametz, and you have to clean all the chametz out, there are certain other foods you don't eat, even though they're not chametz. And the foods are legumes and rice. Nobody really knows why this custom started. There's a theory that in the ancient medieval marketplace, the people who sold wheat or grain products also sold beans or rice. And so the packages, the burlap sacks or whatever they would put their food in was interchangeable. So the flour would be this, well, they would use a sack for flour, and then they would use a sack for beans, and there was like no way you could ever clean out the beans and rice because it was just so immersed into the chamet with grain products, and so therefore that's one theory. Another theory is that a lot of the things that you use, like you can use rice flour. I mean, now there's a lot of different types of flours. There's almond flour and there's potato flour, but that rice and beans were often used to make foodstuffs that looked like bread. That's another theory. Um, but there's nobody knows. And then if you study the history of this, it's called kitniot, is the Hebrew term for these types of food products. If you study the history of kitniot, it's really fascinating because anytime a new food product came along, there was some religious authority who would say, "Oh, that's kitniot, don't eat it." So the history of kitniot is fascinating because at one time garlic was considered kitniot. Um, Mustard is considered kitniot because mustard, I guess, at one time or in some part of Europe grew near um, uh, grain fields, and so they were interspersed. And so so one of these new products, because obviously this food, this vegetable was not known in Europe, but was corn. Corn was considered to be kitniot. And this is a little bit funny, but it unfortunately it makes people's lives miserable. Corn in German is wheat. So when corn was developed and came from the New World, certain authorities forbade corn just because the name corn was the name for wheat. So the problem for this in the modern world is you try and find a food, any kind of processed food that doesn't have corn syrup of some kind or corn-based something in it. It's impossible. So that's why when you go to, if you were to go to a kosher for Passover grocery store, you would see things like mustard for Passover, which doesn't have any mustard in it. It's mustard substitute. Or you'll have um, tomato. You have to get a kosher for Passover tomato sauce because most tomato sauces have corn syrup in it. So it's not that's why a lot of the foods that are kosher for Passover are not foods you look at it that, well, there's no grain in that. Why do you need kosher for Passover? Well, because something in the process of making the food may have used this kitniot substance. Um, Recently, so the Sephardim don't have this problem. Um, Recently, certain Ashkenazic religious authorities, especially those that started in Israel, because in Israel, of course, well, there are so many Sephardim. Most people think that the Jews come from Europe. Well, it's true in America. Most Jews do come from Eastern Europe. But in Israel, most Israelis have some Arab or Middle Eastern family history. So certain Ashkenazic authorities said it's silly now that we're living in the land of Israel that we're continuing these divides between the Jewish people, between Eastern Jews, Western Jews, North African Jews. It's just silly. And there's no justification for this custom. So the process began of Ashkenazic Jews disavowing the kitniot custom. Now, most Jews in America, again, being Ashkenazic, still follow it because that's how that's how they were raised. I broke away from that when I became a vegetarian, especially when I was a vegan. I mean, there was nothing to eat on Passover. You couldn't eat beans, you couldn't eat rice. And so I just finally gave in and said, okay, I'm eating kitniot. So that's my custom now. I will eat kitniot, I will eat rice, I will eat beans on Passover. I don't eat meat, because again, kitniot isn't chametz. But I mention this because it's such an important factor in kosher for Passover foods. Everybody knows you can't eat pancakes, you can't eat spaghetti, but not to be able to eat, to have to get kosher for Passover tomato sauce sounds very odd. But that's the reason why, because Ashkenazic Jews have this unique limitation that is not chametz. That is, if you had beans in your house, you have rice. You have a Sephardic friend who brought over, I don't know, a chickpea salad. You don't have to like clean out your whole house again. You just don't eat the chickpeas, but you can have it in your house. Okay, let's go to, okay. So that was key. That took a lot of time, but food is so essential on Passover, including this next mitzvah, which is to eat matzah. Um, oh, sorry, Brian. I read a book about the. Oh, interesting. Okay, yeah. People are always trying to find some connection. I'm there. Look, my take on the Torah and the historical accuracy of the Torah is that it's not. We shouldn't take it as an evidence-based history, but there are many um, what's the word I'm looking at? Not references. There are many historical reverberations in the stories, so that and as some, I think Jacob Milgram was a very famous Bible scholar, argues, while it's not historically accurate, but at the same time, um, how many cultures have have stories about their spiritual heroes who are so flawed. You know, Abraham, for all of his great qualities, he also offers his wife to the Pharaoh so he doesn't get killed. Jacob is deceitful. So we have, and then as you said, as Ryan pointed out, there are ancient references to some things that connect, that have a reverberate or a resonance in the Torah story. So that's based. So somewhere there's some reality from these narratives. All right, another big mitzvah: eating matzah. Um, the only day that you're obligated to eat matzah, unless you are a person, what is it, celiac disease, in which you really can't eat that. You have to eat matzah. Now, matzah is really significant. I just told you you can't eat chametz, but matzah is made out of wheat. Matzah is the opposite of chametz. Matzah is made out of the 5 grains. Kosher matzah has got to be made out of one of those 5 grains, usually out of wheat, but it's made super fast. The rabbinic definition is within 18 minutes. So it's got to be the minute the water touches the flour, you've got to have a complete matzah within 18 minutes. One of the times I was in Israel, I was privileged to go visit a matzah factory. It was fascinating. They have this conveyor belt. The process begins. They spread it out into the sheets. They flash cook it, and they're done. And then they take apart the machine and they clean the whole thing. because you can't have any residue of wet of this um, dough sitting there, because if there's any dough, you have to, if it's sitting there for more than 18 minutes, it's becomes chametz. So they have to take the whole thing apart and then they start over again. It's really, really interesting. Anyway, so matzah is unleavened bread made out of those 5 grains. Why is it important again on a spiritual level? It is considered lechem oni. Lechem is bread, and oni can mean a number of different reference translations. It can be sometimes it's the bread of affliction, because the people suffered under, that was all they had to eat, right? They didn't get the good stuff. They didn't have the time to let their bread rise. Not even like they were leaving, but in general, they were so hungry they couldn't afford to let the bread rise and make it nice. They just ate it as soon as it was, or they could cook it. It's also ani, related to the word affliction, is poverty. So it's the bread of the poor. Again, same idea. But it's also ani in Hebrew can mean to answer. La'anot is to answer in Hebrew, or to respond. So it's the bread of response, which of course, when we get to the Seder next week, we ask questions throughout the Seder experience. And so it's the bread on which we ask questions and then give answers or respond. Matzah is also a very interesting symbol, because it is both the symbol of persecution. Poor people, impoverished, they don't get the good stuff. They eat the broken pieces of bread, and the bread, as soon as it can be cooked as fast as possible, because they're starving. So that's one end. But on the other hand, again, the story tells us they left Egypt with this matzah. They didn't want to wait. And so it's the bread of liberation. So you got two sides to the story. Matzah is both liberation and it's also affliction. We talked about kitniot. So anyway, so people do eat matzah during the week of the holiday, but you're commanded to eat it on the first night at the Seder. Again, unless you have a physical reason not to eat it. All right, and the other big mitzvah is telling the story of this at the meal on the first 2 nights, the Seder experience. Again, in Israel, it's just the first night. There's just one night of the Seder. In outside the land of Israel, it's 2 nights. So there are 2 Seders, same exact book. We just do it all over again. And those are some of the terms. We'll get to it next week. The Seder means order, because we tell the story in an order. Or we go through the meal, I should say, in an order. But to tell a story is a Haggadah or an Agadah, and that's the name of the book that we use to go through the Seder experience. We'll get to it next week, but it's really, what's fascinating is we do not tell the story of the Exodus the way you usually tell a story. We do not start the evening with, once upon a time, the Jewish people went down to Egypt, and then they were there, and this guy Moses was born, and we don't tell the story that way. I mean, there are fragments of the story that we share, but it's a fascinating way of how. Well, let me put it this way: what's the point of telling a story? Sometimes it's to entertain, but it's also to educate. And really, the Seder experience is about education. And the question is, how do you educate? How do you tell a story in order to educate the people at the table, or the people you're telling your story to? What are the different ways we can tell this story? Well, you can certainly tell the narrative, once upon a time, and then there's a beginning, a middle, and an end to the story. But there's also other ways of telling the story. Ask questions and answer them. Do symbolic foods. Through the symbolic foods, we explain how this story came about, or what's the meaning of the story. The key part of the Seder is telling the story through a process known as Midrash. We've talked about Midrash when we did that section on Torah study, and I mentioned that Midrash is explicating Torah. It's a way to do interpretation and commentary on Torah. And so the main part of the Seder is taking 4 verses from the Torah, interestingly enough, not from the Exodus story, but from the book of Deuteronomy, referring to it's a summarized version of telling the Exodus when a farmer brings his first fruits to the temple, because you would make an offering of first fruits, and then the farmer would make this statement and offer this gift. We take those verses and we take the verses apart and we explore those verses, which is a summary of the Passover story, and we talk and we pull out the story that way. So it's not exactly doing it in a narrative chronological order, but it's talking about what's the essence, what's the meaning of the story, why did this happen, how did this happen, what's the meaning for it for us today. So that's telling the story, and the point, as we're told in the Seder experience, that every person who's at the Seder is supposed to experience through the telling of the story as if we were there. So that we want to feel as if we experienced the Exodus ourselves. And we do that through this experience of the Seder. Okay, what else we got here? Preparation for Pesach. Again, we just celebrated Easter, right? So Easter begins with the period of Lent, where you have this prep period. Well, we have a prep period too, in a sense, liturgically, before Pesach. There are 4 special Shabbatot before Passover. And on these holidays, one of them is for Purim, but the other 3 connect to Passover. And then there's this last one, Shabbat Hagadol, which comes right before Passover. So quickly, Shabbat Shkalim, we mention the ancient tradition of donating. Every Jew was supposed to donate a half shekel, didn't matter whether you're rich or poor, half shekel to the temple. And the reason for that was that money was used to buy community offerings for the coming year. It was also supposed to be used to get the temple or the tabernacle and later the temple in shape, because you're going to have people, thousands of people coming for Passover to make make their offering. Shabbat Zachor is the Shabbat right before Purim, in which we mentioned this last week. We remember Amalek, the evil Amalek in the time of the Torah, who is the ancestor of Haman, who's the bad guy in the Purim story. Then comes Shabbat Parah. We just observed that, where we read this passage from chapter 19, the book of Numbers, which talks about this really unusual ritual that was part of the purification process. Purification because if a person touches a dead body, they are ritually impure. And that means you can't enter the sacred places, like the temple. Well, everybody's got to enter the temple to to make this offering for Passover. So you have to be prepared. And this special ritual was a cow, a completely red cow, very rare. I think according to one midrash, there were only 7 in history. But this completely red cow would be slaughtered, turned to its body parts turned to ashes. He then would take the ashes and mix it with water to create this potion. And this potion would be sprinkled on the person who was going through the purification process. Again, we're reading it because we're preparing. We're getting ready. You've got to make sure you got that potion ready to go as people need to enter into the sanctuary, the holy of well, not the holy of holies, but the altar area to make the offering, so they could be in a state of ritual purity. So you have to make sure that that's ready. This coming week is Shabbat HaChodesh, which is chapter 12 in the book of Exodus, in which we read the details of the beginning of the calendar, and that this is the beginning of basically of the creation of the people, of the Jewish people. For now, the Jewish people will be responsible for maintaining this calendar, and also preparing for this offering, this initial, the original offering of the Paschal sacrifice, because they have to go make sure they got a goat ready to go for the holiday. And then finally, so those are the 4 special Shabbatot, and then the Shabbat before Passover is referred to as Shabbat HaGadol, literally the Great Sabbath. Not so clear why it's called the Great Sabbath. The word HaGadol is used in the prophetic reading for the day. Yom Gadol, the great day, is coming. So maybe that's why some people consider it to be the Great Sabbath, because great in terms of length, because unlike the unfortunate Jewish people who have to come to services today and listen to me give a sermon every week, in ancient times there usually be just a couple of times of the year where the rabbi of the community would give a sermon, and one of the times was before Passover, because he would review the Passover laws. So it just took longer. So that's one theory as to why it was called Shabbat HaGadol. It was just a longer, not great Sabbath, but the longer Sabbath. And there's one more theory about Shabbat HaGadol, because supposedly the 10th, when we read in Shabbat HaChodesh, we learn that on the 10th day of the month of Nisan, they were supposed to take the goat to make sure it was safe. It was it wasn't going to get wounded or anything like that, because 4 days later they'd have to offer it up. So the original Shabbat HaGadol supposedly was on a Shabbat, the 10th day of the month, and so it was considered a great Shabbat, a great Sabbath, because this was the day when they would be preparing and arranging everything for their liberation. All right, some other things to know about Passover. Okay, we talked about it. 7-day holiday in the Bible. In the diaspora, an extra day. I hope I can. I always get confused when I try to explain this, but let's see if I can do it simply. The Hebrew month is 29 and a half days. That's the amount of time it takes for the moon to go around the earth, to make an orbit. It takes 29 and a half days. Well, 29 and a half days, the first time you start 29 and a half days, the new month might be starting on that 29th day, right? I mean, it's 29 and a half. I guess it should be the 30th day, that half day. But the next time, right, 29 and a half, 29 and a half is 59. So the next time it might be 30 days later, not the 29th day, right? So you have this, so the new month is going to start on the 30th day or the 31st day following the previous month, depending on where you are in that 29 and a half day cycle. Okay. Well, the holiday itself, holidays of like Passover and Sukkot fall in the middle of the month. In ancient times, even though they had this calendar, even though these mathematical geniuses figured out the calendar and when the holiday, when the month would fall, and when you needed to add the extra month for the year, and when the exact day of Passover and Sukkot would fall, the rule was, even at this early time when they had the math, the court in Jerusalem, because this is before the math was figured out, the court in Jerusalem had to determine the new month. even though whether it was mathematical or not, you had to come to the court. Somebody had to come to the court, the head court in Jerusalem, and say, "Oh, I saw the new moon. Finally showed." Okay, they'd ask you a bunch of questions because they knew where the moon was supposed to show up for that month, and you answer the questions correctly. Oh, yep, looks like you got the right information. Then they would send out runners across all the Jewish settlements to tell them, okay, the new month has started, which is really helpful because you know that, let's say it's the month of Nisan, okay, 15 days later, we're going to have Pesach. Well, that was okay if you lived close enough to the Jerusalem where they could get to you. But what if you lived in Asia Minor, which is where Jews were living? What if you lived in Babylonia? Um, it would take so long for the word to get to Babylonia that, oh, we just declared the new month. You might, you might not know when Passover was starting. It took too long to get to those outer communities. So therefore, since a month is 29 and a half days, it's either going to be the 30th day or the 31st day. That means the holiday of Passover is going to start either on the 15th day from what, well, yeah, well, the 15th day of what you assumed was the start of the month or the 16th day. One of those 2 days is going to be the right one. Because of that, that developed the custom of celebrating outside the land of Israel these 2 days for a holiday. And so therefore, even though we do know exactly what day Passover is going to fall in the diaspora, we've maintained this custom. And so the Reform movement did away with that because they said this is silly, which, to some extent, I guess they're right. But of course, Judaism, like all thousand-year-old faith traditions, is based on tradition. And if my grandfather and great-grandfather, 50 generations before me, observed 2 days of the holiday, that's what I'm going to do too. So in our congregation, we continue to follow that. Like Orthodox congregations, there are a few conservative congregations that have said it's enough already. We're just doing the first day. We're just doing a 1 day holidays like in Israel. But many conservative congregations, as well as Orthodox, observe the 2 days in diaspora. So what do he say here? So we observe 2 days in the diaspora. Okay, so that's why we have two seders. Also, the first 2 days and the last 2 days are holidays because in the Bible, the first day and the seventh day are actual holidays. No work on those days. We recite Hallel throughout the holiday. The first 2 days we recite the entire Hallel. Hallel is Psalms 113 to 118. It's recited on happy occasions. So we recite those as part of our worship service. The first 2 days we recite all of Hallel. The rest of the days of the holiday we recite just the a partial Hallel, which is actually there's a lovely reason for it. The seventh day of Passover celebrates the crossing of the Sea of Reeds. And in that narrative story, right, what happens? The Israelites are saved, and we sing that song at the sea because we're so happy, and the Egyptians get swallowed up by the sea. The midrash, the teaching about this event, is the angels start to sing the song at the sea, which is a song of praising God for this event. And God says to the angels, "You can't sing. I don't want you to sing because Israel can sing because they went through this horrible experience. But you don't sing when my creatures, the Egyptians, are dying." So for God, it was grateful that Israel had been saved, there was an element of sadness because of the death of Egyptians. So therefore, because of their death, the custom is we don't say full Hallel. Hallel, we can't sing the full celebratory prayers because of the death of the Egyptians. So therefore, we on the seventh day of the holiday, we don't sing the full Hallel because there's a custom in Judaism of we ascend in holiness, we don't decrease in holiness. One of the explanations as to why we light one more candle each night of Hanukkah, as opposed to starting with 8 and going down. We increase in holiness. So since we've already decided we're not going to celebrate the full Hallel on the last day of the holidays, the custom is after the first 2 days of the holiday, none of the days do we sing full Hallel. We are we just the partial Hallel. Okay. Also, every holiday we have a Megillah. We read a special scroll, a special book, and on the holiday of Pesach, we recite Shir HaShirim, the Song of Songs. It is the poem takes place during the spring, and so therefore we sing this, and it's about the love between God and Israel, and so that's what we're celebrating on the holiday of Passover, is the connection between God and Israel, and so we recite that book, Song of Songs. Also, very important, on the second night of Passover, in Israel it would be the first, what we call Chol HaMoed, the first middle day of the holiday. In the diaspora, again, it's the second Seder. We start a count. Every night we count a day, working our way up to 49, because this is the period between Passover and Shavuot. And during that 49-day, we're anticipating the next stage of the liberation. The first stage was physical liberation, getting out from slavery, and Shavuot is spiritual liberation. It's when God reveals God's self to the Jewish people through the Torah and the Ten Commandments. So and that's why the holiday is called Shavuot. Shavuot means weeks. 49 days is 7 perfect weeks, 7 weeks of 7 days. And so we count in anticipation of that moment of Shavuot. So every night we count, we say today, and it's called the counting of the Omer, because the Omer is a certain amount of grain. And during these 49 days, any one of those days, in the temple, they could bring a gift of barley, which is the next crop. So it depended on when they were able to pick the crop. Usually it would be picked, usually it was brought as soon as possible, but any one of those 49 days, they could bring it. So this is the Omer period, the period of count. And so it becomes, the name of this period of time becomes the counting of the Omer period. Even though Omer is just a measurement of grain, or measurement, that you would bring to that the priests brought as an offering in the temple. So the counting of the Omer is this 49-day period. It was a somber period for a number of reasons, which we'll get to when we talk about Shavuot. But I think on a spiritual level, it is preparing ourselves to receive Torah. And so, there's a certain amount of seriousness that we take during these 49 days. And the 50th day is Shavuot. So we'll get to that next week. I think this is the last slide. Yeah. All right. So that's Passover. Next week, we are going to go through the Seder. We're going to go through the 14, or some people call it 15 parts of the Seder, and we'll just go through each one and the symbolism of it. Also, if you want, if you're invited to a Seder, that's great. But if you're not, you can join me on April 22nd. That night is the first night of Passover. The Seder begins at nightfall because that's when the people that's when the liberation began, right? With the Malach HaMavet, the angel of death, and the people being allowed to leave. So it starts at nightfall, which is great unless you live in South Bend, Indiana, when its night is 9 o'clock at night. I mean, and the Seder experience can go for 2 or 3 hours. So, so most people do not want to wait, at least in our community, are not waiting till 9 o'clock, especially if you got little kids. How are you going to celebrate Pesach with your little ones when they're going to bed at 7 o'clock? So I'm going to have what I do is at 5:30, I do a Seder on Zoom for anybody who wants to join in. And we go through the whole Seder. We don't do the meal part. That's left to everybody at their own home. But we go through everything up to the meal, and then we talk a little bit about the part of the Seder after the meal. And we do it in about an hour. And I love it because it gets me out of the house when everybody's going crazy trying to prepare for the Seder experience at 9 o'clock. So, but I'll do it at 9:30. We'll do it with the foods. We'll do it with all the symbolic foods. So you can join us that, and it's not this link. It's the worship link that we usually have. I mean, I'll send it to everybody. Make sure in fact, I may have already sent it to you. But it's the regular Sinai worship link that we do our evening minyan and some of our morning minyanim on. So you are welcome to join us for that. If you want to have a Seder experience, where I do my regular, oh, they're there. So anyway, I don't know if anybody has any other questions about Passover.
I have a couple of questions, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So, in just different research that I've done, there's two different things that I wanted to ask. I've heard about, and I'm probably pronouncing this way wrong, but Gibrot,
Oh,
where like they donate,
gebrach, like
where
matzah
certain,
gebrach. Wait.
yes, where like certain traditional Jews donate like matzo balls and stuff on
Oh, right. Yes.
Pesach. Do you know anything
Yes.
about
Yes. So it's not enough if you're an Ashkenazic Jew. It's not enough that don't, you can't, you can't eat kitniot. You can't eat beans or rice or anything like that. You can't eat regular grain stuff. Obviously, that's not permitted on holiday. But some people have this custom that even though the matzah has been cooked, what if it wasn't completely cooked? Now you've got uncooked grain or dough sitting in your matzah. You don't know about it, you can't tell. But what if it's there? And if you now mix it with water, like to make matzo ball soup, or a bit of popular food in our house is what we call matzah brai. It's fried matzah. You gotta, oh my God, you might be eating chametz. So some people restrict cooking matzah or matzah meal. That's very common too. What they do, matzah meal is basically just the cooked matzah. You grind it up into like a flour, and then you make things out of it. So you make like matzah balls. Well, they don't eat that. Now, I have a sister-in-law who has chosen to do this. To me, that is just torture upon torture. But for those who have that custom, that's the custom. The only day that they will eat, oh, so matzah gebracht, wait, I always forget the term because gebracht is a Yiddish term. And I think, is it broken? I think matzah gebracht is what they eat on the last day. Like they won't eat matzah gebracht, and then the last day they do. the eighth day of Passover is the only day because again, it's an iffy day. Maybe it's not. Maybe the end of the holiday was the day before. That's the only day that they'll eat it. But yes, that is a custom among some Jewish people to not to only eat the matzah plate, basically, not to mix it, not to cook it in any kind of. We make matzah lasagna during the holiday. They wouldn't do that again because it's possibly, you're putting liquid on the matzah and I guess a potential for it to leaven if it wasn't completely cooked. But anyway, but it's a custom. It's a custom.
Okay. And then I did have one last question. Also, in some of the research I've been doing, traditional Jews like burn hametz. Is that something you're familiar with at all?
Right. So what many people do, the right before Passover. Okay, so it's the day before Passover. If I'm pretty sure, yeah. The fourth hour. Wait, the fourth hour you finish eating any chametz. The fourth hour of the day. That's the fourth relative hour of the day. So day starts at 6 o'clock in the morning. At 10 o'clock, no more chametz. Can't eat chametz anymore. Um, the fifth hour, you then take your leftover chametz and you destroy it completely. You have to completely wipe it, destroy it. And what some people do, well, what does it mean to destroy? Well, you could put it down the toilet. That's getting rid of it completely, right? Because you got to get rid of this stuff. You've collected all this chametz, you got to get rid of it. But some people, they make a big bonfire and then you throw all of it in there. It's a lot of fun. My experience, I used to do that too. I used to get a container. We wouldn't have that much. A container, and it was a lot of fun to start a fire, and you throw everything in the fire. And I did that until one year. I actually, was able to turn everything into ashes. It was great. And then I threw the ashes out into a corner of our yard where we kind of use it as like a compost place. And a couple of hours later, we hear fire trucks come into our house around our neighborhood. And a neighbor of ours comes over and says, knocks on the door and says, "Do you know that the grass outside your fence is on fire?" Somehow I thought, like, you burn stuff up, it's ashes. I didn't realize that ashes are still so hot they can start grass on fire. Miracle of miracles, it did not burn down my fence, but which we have a wooden fence, but it went under the fence and burned all the grass, and the two fire trucks came, put it out, and it was really embarrassing. And after that, Lizzie told me, "You are not allowed to burn anything anymore." So I do not burn the leaven. If you I think the Torah Midwest Torah Center, which is one of the Orthodox congregations in town, I think they always have a big like bonfire thing, and they let people come and throw all that stuff out, and the kids love it. But no, what I do is I either have gotten rid of everything beforehand, and just a little bit, and I put it down you just flush it down the toilet. But yeah, so that's another way to do it. A little safer, unless you have a lot of stuff and then you don't want to put it down your toilet. Um, okay, so anyway, but yes, you're correct. That is the destruction of the chametz. You want to get rid of your chametz at the end of the before the holiday starts in that fifth hour, and then you're ready to go. So yeah, so the idea is to completely get rid of it, and again, traditionally, burning it up or getting rid of it in some other way, so that you don't have it on your premises anymore. Okay, any other questions? Well, again, if you think of anything, you can always shoot me a question. We'll meet next Monday and we'll go through the Seder. All right.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Everybody have a good evening.
Have a nice.
Thank you.
All right,
You
take
too.
care.
Thank you.
Have a good
Thanks,
night.
Rabbi. Shabbat tov.
Bye-bye.